The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. Happy New Year. We are here for our first episode of 2025, and we are still looking back at 2024 as we continue on with the best of 2024. We have already talked about some things in the best of 2024. We've talked about the best of pro wrestling in 2024, and we're going to be spending some time talking about the best of music later this month, but we're going to get to the best of anime in this episode of the Nerdcast Empire. So a lot of good stuff to talk about, some of our favorite shows, some of our favorite music, and of course our favorite topics, which have been news stories many, many times through the year. Joining me in studio for this best of 2024 edition is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going. Big year last year. I watched a lot more anime than I had in previous years, so pretty excited about that. Going into 2025, I just hope that we can keep riding this OhioCon and Crunchyroll train wreck news story cycle that, has kept us going for a while now.
I mean, really only in the fact that I hope these two entities survive 2025 to allow that to happen, because I think that could be the thing that stops us from talking about them in 2025 is a potential downfall of both of them, which is, of course, why we're going to talk about them. When we look at the big news stories in the world of anime to us, in our world, that we kind of look at in 2024, number one is OhioCon and everything that has come from it. And that's where we're going to start the podcast today, talking about OhioCon. Of course, OhioCon is the long-running, typically January held, although there are times where the calendar falls where it ends up being in February. Anime convention. It has been most held in Columbus at the Greater Columbus Convention Center. Of course, it was held about this time last year in Columbus, and at least for the time being, appears to be the last time that it will be in Columbus for the foreseeable future. A lot of things happened at the end of last year, and by last year, I mean 2023, leading into OhioCon 2024, with a group of workers basically not being invited back or boycotting, depending on who was on what side of it, I guess, caused another split in the OhioCon world as far as the workers go, and then led to the formation of the Sakai Guild, which is going to eventually be SakaiCon, which will be coming up later this year. And OhioCon basically ended up pivoting. They announced they were going to be moving the upcoming convention to Dayton. They are supposedly going to have a new ownership. We're going to talk about that as we go on. They do have new convention staff as far as the people running the convention. They have promised transparency and have, in most cases, not delivered the transparency they have promised. And in the end, there's going to be two new anime conventions, because even though the one coming up at the end of this month or the beginning of February still is OhioCon in name, it's very much not OhioCon as we've known it. And then, of course, SakaiCon coming up in April on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. But as we kind of look at the view from 50,000 feet up high, it's hard to imagine that the last 18 months could have really gone any worse for OhioCon or really anybody associated with it, because, obviously we've talked a lot about how MatsuриCon was formed out of the ashes of the previous issues with OhioCon, and MatsuriCon has gone on to be a very successful summer convention in Columbus and continues to exist to this day, but it just feels like this rift was a lot worse. It feels a lot more personal. It doesn't seem like really anybody has dealt with it maybe in the best way. And we're sitting here either 4 weeks or 3 months away from these two conventions with a lot more questions than we have answers as to what these entities are going to look like going forward.
Yeah, I think one major difference between last time this happened in 2006, I believe, and 2024, 2023, is just people don't tend to let things slide anymore. I think with maybe because of the increased prevalence of social media, when something kind of gains any traction, if someone's angry enough about it, they'll keep it running as long as humanly possible. And we've seen that on OhioCon social media for a while. It seems to have died down a little by this point, but there was a point in time where anything they would try to post would just get hammered by negative comments, laugh reactions. They'd have to turn off comments. It was kind of a train wreck. And I think people aren't so willing to throw their money into something if they feel like the person running it is someone that they don't want to support. And knowing or seeming that OhioCon is at the moment for profit, I just don't think people want to put money into who they feel kind of tanked the prior OhioCon.
And, there have been all these promises. First it was simply, well, she's stepping aside, so these people are running it. But she's still there, and it's still for profit. And then these posts about how she's leaving again. Like, it was almost like she just continues to announce her exit and never leaves. And, there's just all this discussion about, is there going to be a new owner? And then all the questions that we've talked about, just because of kind of our perspective on it, as someone not maybe directly involved with it, compared to what the anime community has talked about, the talk of, is this convention in debt? Is the new owner going to have to buy the debt? Are they going to have to settle debts if they're ever going to go, is one of those debts with the GCCC in Columbus or the Hyatt Regency? A lot of questions from a business standpoint that, need to be asked if you're actually going to seriously cover this issue. And yet you open up Anime News Network and here's a fluff PR piece. You open up the Dayton Daily News and here's a fluff PR piece. Nobody wants to actually do any journalism on this. And again, I'm not rooting for OhioCon to fail, but there are serious questions that have to be answered if you're going to ask the average con goer to give you $70, $80 to go to this convention for 3 days, which is at a worse location. There's just no...
Yeah.
You can say... I have nothing against Dayton, Ohio. There's a lot of really cool things in Dayton. Everybody should go to, like, Wright Pat and the Air Force Museum and a lot of cool things up there. We've talked a ton about the mall at Fairfield Commons. There's no question that the Dayton Convention Center is in every way, shape, and form worse than the Greater Columbus Convention Center by a large margin. They're doing their best. They're doing renovations. They're hoping to get a new hotel tenant in there. It's a downgrade in every way, shape, and form, and you're asking people to sign up for a worse experience for about the same amount of money. Then you've got to come clean on some of this stuff. And again, we are 3 weeks out from this convention. There is almost radio silence at this point from OhioCon about any of these things that they supposedly were going to be transparent about. And if you're somebody who was just waiting for them to basically apologize or, actually show some sign that the previous owners are going to be gone, you're not getting any of that. So why would you even begin to not continue to be irritated on social media at these guys?
And I think that's part of the issue, is that even if you walked into it totally neutral, which for the most part I feel like we did, we didn't really have a horse in the race.
Yeah.
You at least wanted to hear both sides say, this is what happened. And you feel like the people on the Sakai side, you got a pretty good understanding of how they believed everything went down, but you never once, and to me, typically this falls on leadership, you never once heard any kind of contrition from the owner of OhioCon. It was never, hey, I could have done things better. Just even the simplest words of mistakes were made, you didn't even get that, and that's troubling. And they bring in this new director, Stephen Baker, who in that first Zoom call months ago alluded to the idea that this was going to be a regular thing. We were going to hear from you regularly on a live Q&A kind of format, and that didn't happen again. You heard... The best part was in regards to Melissa, the owner, it was always she's stepping away. She's stepping away. It was, if your boss said, hey, I'm stepping away, that doesn't immediately tell you she's quitting or being fired. That just says a sabbatical maybe at the most. It's not a permanent walk away. It's not, I'm done. And that was all we ever heard. Eventually, they did come around and say, well, there is going to be someone coming in and taking over ownership that's going to buy this thing, presumably, but we've still not gotten any indication that was a real thing at all. No names have been dropped, no evidence supporting that claim. It's just, they came out as far as like hey, we're going to be transparent about all this. Then they didn't do any of that. And it was almost like they pivoted to the stance of, well, it'll all go away. We're just going to brush it under the rug and people are going to move on.
And the problem is it may all go away. And in this case, it may be the convention itself that goes away because people don't have the expendable income that they've had. So, even like us, when we look at convention choices, when we're looking at the year, you have to figure out what's going to give me the best value for my money, what's going to make for the best weekend. And we'll talk about that convention later on because we're going to talk about our convention of the year.
Anime conventions are very non-essential.
They are. And to me, they have always been, even from the first cons we went to, they've always been an excuse to travel to new places, to see new things, to get out of town for a weekend, and also get to kind of enjoy about something that we enjoy, going to a place where there are other people that enjoy it as well. That's why we randomly took a plane flight to Dallas to go to this tiny convention because it was an excuse to go to Dallas. And, we've been to Baltimore a couple times. I've been to Los Angeles, Memphis, Chicago. We've been places that we would have never gone. And obviously more recently, Raleigh, North Carolina.
It's Cleveland.
Yeah. That's what anime conventions have always been to us. And if you put on a good con that we enjoy, we'll probably come back. Even though we want to go to new places, we also are going to value places that clearly want to make it worth our money. And right now, there's really only one convention we go to every year that I feel that way about, which means there's time to start looking for some other new conventions to go to. And, everything that's happened with OhioCon, we would have continued to go to OhioCon because it fell into category 2 of conventions. Why do you go? 1, because it's a great convention or it's a cool new place that we haven't been. Or 2, it's convenient. It's during a time of year where we're looking to get out of town and spend a weekend in Columbus, which is a city we love. And, that was one of those cons where the city earned that con a lot of points because it got us a chance to spend a weekend up there. But when your con is just not good, and now it's not even in Columbus, it's in Dayton.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. So I just don't know if they can't get it figured out. They needed to bring somebody in that actually could just handle the PR side of it and just tell those people, this is what you need to do. And you also have to understand that some people, no matter what you say and do, will never forgive you.
Yeah.
Will never let it go. But you're not trying to satiate those people. You're trying to take care of the people who read those people online and want to know more about it. If you've admitted to faults and say, hey, we're going to clean this up, we've made mistakes, we can't go back and fix them, we can only go forward, and you start taking responsibility and you talk about all the changes, those are the people that then will start looking at the people who won't let it go as the weirdos, as the people that have a problem. But when they look at you and you still have problems, then they're going to be like, well, maybe these people have a point. So
the weirdos have some justification at least.
Yeah. So the whole thing is a total mess. It's why obviously it's our number one news story for our podcast for 2024 because, like I said, we are sitting here. OhioCon is in 4 weeks. SakaiCon is in 3 months. And we still really don't know what SakaiCon's going to look like.
No, very limited announcements so far on that front.
Yep, which is a little surprising. OhioCon has announced a lot of guests. Have not announced Mike Center Nicholas, who was announced in that one Zoom call as a guest and has not been announced. So I don't know, was that somebody jumping the gun? Did he back out of it? Are they going to announce him in the next 3 weeks?
It's either that or they're waiting for the admission price to reach the highest threshold and then announce him in hopes of bleeding a little more money out of people who will likely decide to go just based on his appearance.
For sure, as they should. You should, if you haven't seen him in a convention, you should go see him. He's one of the best guests on the con circuit, hands down.
But up to this point, I mean, there's 12 voiceover guests. I'm not, there are a couple decent sized names, like John Swayze's going to be there. That's cool. A few industry people, kind of the typical ones that would go to OhioCon anyway. No real musical guests or featured panelists. Like the things that I look for in a convention, OhioCon's just lacking in all of it.
Yeah. And again, I don't know what their goals are. Are they just going to settle into being a small weekend con that, just doesn't make a ton of money, doesn't bring a lot of people in? They're just going to be okay with that? Because that's kind of what this lineup looks like to me. And are they going to be stuck in Dayton, or are they going to reconsider that? That's another question to me. We're going to go up for a day because I think we owe it to our podcast listeners to bring back a full report on what we see. But as far as like spending, getting a 3-day badge or going up and spending the weekend, I can't see a scenario where I would do that in Dayton until potentially they have a hotel connected to the convention center, because there's no way I'm having to get on a shuttle bus every time we want to go back to the hotel room.
That's not ideal at the end of January.
Not at all. It's not ideal really anytime, but it is certainly not ideal, especially right now where they're talking about us getting maybe several inches of snow over the weekend. Kind of gives you an idea what January might look like. We haven't had a bad winter in this area in a while. We're almost due for a lot of snow and ice and stuff like that. So that's the OhioCon story. It's unfortunately one that we are probably going to continue to talk about because it was a convention that was very important to us, and it's very important to a lot of anime fans here in the Ohio Valley. And what becomes of it, I think we're going to get a good idea here in about the next 4 or 5 weeks, because if it's a disappointing turnout or if there are more problems with it or whatever the situation may be, I think it'll be a real question mark whether it comes back next year. Honestly, I didn't think it was going to happen this year, so I guess in some regards they're ahead of that. But
we're not there yet.
It hasn't happened, but that would really be something if they canceled it last minute. But especially with all the people dropping money on it, for sure. But so we'll obviously continue to cover it, and certainly once we go up, we'll come back with a full report on what OhioCon looked like. The other big story in 2024 is Crunchyroll, and this is obviously an industry-wide thing. Of course, Crunchyroll, thanks to the sale with Sony, basically absorbed Funimation. I mean, really it was Funimation absorbing Crunchyroll, but they decided to keep the Crunchyroll name as their branding, which still really doesn't make any sense to me. But that decision is, kind of water under the bridge at this point. The real issue with Crunchyroll is really almost every misstep that they've had in 2024 that just continues to boggle the mind. Obviously, their streaming app has just long been a source of consternation among anime fans. There have been multiple issues with it. It seems relatively stable at the moment, but still problems. And obviously, the first thing that came up this year was the removal of comments from their website, and they had their reasons. I think maybe some of that had to do with what they actually said it was about. I think more of it had to do with their lack of quality that people were going to be complaining about. Right after that, we got the news of potentially either AI generated or just poorly created subtitles on certain shows, including Nokotan. And then, there's also audio issues. As one of the shows I was watching, 10 minutes into an episode, dropped the audio down so low that I had to turn my TV almost all the way up to be able to hear it. And then, of course, the next episode kicks in and it's fixed, and I'm about to blow the speakers out of my television. But it's like, this was a show that was fairly popular, that this is the second episode of this show that's already finished. So, I mean, there's no way that I was the first person to run into this issue, and yet it still persists as being bad. And then there's the matter of the fact that they're not the big dog in the industry anymore, because you've got Netflix, you've got Amazon Prime, you've got Hulu, you've got all these other streaming services that are either taking the same shows or having their own exclusive titles that are running on their services. The report came out that Netflix earned twice as much in revenue from anime that Crunchyroll did in 2024. And again, it's not exactly apples to oranges, because Netflix has a far larger subscriber base than Crunchyroll does. And of course, Netflix does a lot of other things than just anime, but it's a real concern. And then that doesn't even touch on the David Wald story, where supposedly they've been opening his mail for months and giving away contents of his mail at the Crunchyroll studios. And supposedly there's going to be more to that story at some point when he talks about it. So as we look at this, the whole thing is wild. It's amazing that, Funimation basically disappeared and became what is now Crunchyroll. And it's a company that, again, you just have to wonder, how do you keep getting it so wrong? And what does this mean for what Crunchyroll looks like in the future?
Yeah. both names really weren't ideal. I don't know why they didn't just decide to brand it some sort of Sony-related name, because obviously Funimation's been toxic with fans for years, so is Crunchyroll. It just... Neither one was a good option. I don't know why they went with Crunchyroll specifically over Funimation, but I don't know if either were the ideal choice.
If you were going to keep one, you would think you would keep the one that wasn't a pirate site.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even if both are bad, then maybe don't open yourself up to all the comments about piracy that is always going to come up with Crunchyroll, because that's how they started, was a piracy website.
Exactly. But, yeah, going through the timeline, back in May, they raised their prices. Following that in July, like you mentioned, they decided to remove comments on all the shows, which is always a great idea to remove the ability of your customers to tell you what they think of your product. That's always smart. In October is when the David Wald thing came out with the mail issue. And, he even mentioned on a separate X post that, he accused management of discrimination, union busting, and just creating a culture of fear, a hostile work environment, etc. So it wasn't even like the mail was one thing, but clearly that guy wasn't too thrilled with anything going on management-wise there. And also to your point, they came out with that report talking about the 2023 revenues, saying that Netflix, just on anime alone, brought in $2.07 billion to Crunchyroll's 1.16. So that's a big deal. That's not all of Netflix. That's just the anime side of it. And, I was kind of looking at the fall anime slate, and yeah, there's still the shows that are specifically just on Crunchyroll. You had, ReZero, Shangri-La Frontier Season 2, but, Bleach, Thousand Year Blood War, Disney+. Danmachi Season 5 on High Dive, Orb on the Movement of the Earth, Netflix, Blue Box, Netflix, Rama 1/2, Netflix. Then you had shows like Dandadan, which is on Netflix and Crunchyroll, so you didn't need Crunchyroll for Dandadan. And then One Piece, which seems to be on every platform apparently, but even that, I mean, you look at when they made a live action One Piece, that was Netflix. So I just... I recently re-upped my Netflix subscription, and just looking at the amount of anime they have, there's not a surprise to me that they're kind of eating Crunchyroll's lunch, so to speak.
And, I mean, one of the obviously the show that I'm going to pick for my best of the year, Oshi no Ko, being a High Dive exclusive, just seemed like, because, I mean, Kaguya-sama Love is War was all on Crunchyroll, so you would think maybe they would have had an inside scoop to getting the other show made by the same guy, and they don't, and now, High Dive's got it, which is certainly a boom for them, but...
You think it's one thing when there was the possibility that out of your top 10 shows of a season, High Dive might get one of them. That's one thing, but now it's like you have High Dive getting one of them, you have Netflix getting 3 of them exclusively, Disney getting one of them exclusively, and then some of them just being available over multiple services. So it's Crunchyroll doesn't have the stranglehold on the industry that I think they had hoped they would at this point.
Right. And again, as we talked about with the Netflix numbers, just for full disclosure, we don't really know how those are calculated because obviously, if I'm a Netflix subscriber and I watch one episode of an anime as my monthly subscription fee, now all of a sudden in the anime pile, is it also in the NFL pile? Is it in the WWE pile? Like, you can fudge that a little bit, whereas Crunchyroll obviously is only anime. So if I sign up for Crunchyroll, that is the only reason I'm signing up for it. But there was the other issue that one of the industry experts, and I was just trying to look that tweet up, and I couldn't think of who specifically it was, but one of the guys that used to be at Funimation was talking about how, in the early days of Funimation, when they had a show, they had everything. They had the physical media rights, the digital media rights, the merchandising rights. They had it all. So you have a show like Dragon Ball Z and you're releasing physical media, you're streaming the episodes, you're helping work on the video games, you're doing the figures, like all of that stuff counts toward the revenue you're making off of that one license. Well, now, not only do we have the diversification of the different platforms, as you just mentioned, but also these shows' merchandise rights in many cases are being handled by the American subsidiary of the Japanese company that held the license in the first place. So they don't need Crunchyroll to do figures for their shows. They're just going to import the ones they have in Japan and put them on the shelves here, or whatever the situation may be. And a lot of these shows don't get physical releases at all now, especially with Crunchyroll. so many shows that it takes forever for these shows to come out on a physical medium. So you're not even getting the sales from that anymore.
Yeah, there were shows from last year I'm still waiting on some sort of physical release. We just recently got Tokyo Revengers coming out physically, but yeah, to me, you run the risk of alienating more people when you go that route because anime fandom's very much like retro game fandom. It's very, the old heads still want the copy of it in front of them. Like, yeah, they're the people that are content with streaming, but you're turning off a lot of them when you stop giving them access to digital purchases.
Yeah, and of course that whole transfer of Crunchyroll and Funimation with a lot of those digital rights going away. Rachel mentioning her husband canceled his Crunchyroll because he can get anime other places. And that's something that's happening a lot is, of course, WWE moving to Netflix coming up next week. And a lot of people have had Netflix forever for various reasons. And now they're able to get back into wrestling because now wrestling's coming to them. And I think the same thing is true of anime. A lot of these fans maybe wouldn't have gotten High Dive or Crunchyroll or Funimation, but they've got Netflix, so hey, I'm going to watch these shows that are on Netflix because I already have the streaming service. It's not necessary. And of course, one thing I didn't put in our rundown, but kind of the running parallel to all of this is a lot of the news has been coming out in the last week or so about all these new piracy sites being taken down.
Yeah.
Because these companies know that once you diversify the streaming services and people, can't just get one thing to watch all the shows they want to watch, at some point you just decide, I don't have, I can't pay $15 a month for Crunchyroll and $10 a month for High Dive and
$23 for Netflix.
Yeah. So it's like, but I can go to, stealmyanime.com. I don't think that's a real website, but it may be by the time the show's over. But you can go there and just download these shows illegally. And we've never obviously advocated for piracy in anime, but you're going to see more of those sites pop up as more of these shows. I mean, we just saw a big story about a couple of websites that handle sports streaming illegally that have been taken down because you've got college football playoffs on cable, you've got NFL games on Netflix, you've got all these things are going in different directions.
The contracts are getting larger and larger.
Yeah.
They want a return on that.
Absolutely, which means, of course, they're going to make sure that you can't get it for free illegally, which, I mean, again, they should, but at the same time, you to some degree, as someone who just kind of sees that you eventually just can't get it all anymore, you get a little frustrated, and maybe you want to try to find other ways to find it. But
well, you start having to making decisions. It's like, well, maybe I don't need to watch the new Bleach. Maybe I don't need to watch Don Machi.
Yeah.
You start making sacrifices because, I only want to pay for so many. Whether I can afford it or not, it's immaterial. I don't want to pay $200 a month just to various streaming services.
And of course, that's part of the reason why we've seen the slowdown in physical releases, because if like, hey, I can just wait until June and I'll get a physical copy of Don Machi, then maybe I don't need to buy the streaming service. I can wait 6 months. I'm patient.
Yeah.
But if it's 3 years now before you get a physical copy of that season, then maybe you don't have the patience for that. Maybe you do want to check it out. So.
And then it becomes a matter of what company is doing this to me and how do I feel about them as a whole. Because, High Dive and Sentai Filmworks, I kind of like supporting them because even when, they'll give me a physical copy, and when they do, it's going to be pretty cheap when I buy it on sale. I don't mind paying the monthly charge to continue to fund their existence, so to speak.
I didn't put this in our categories, but if I had to pick a company of the year, it would be Sentai Filmworks / High Dive. Like, they have continued to some degree to stay as consumer friendly as they possibly can be. If you want to have a criticism, and I think it's a minor one, their dubs do tend to come out a little slower, but at the same time, slower than Crunchyroll, but maybe not slower than Netflix, as you're finding out with a show that has an English trailer, yet no English dub is available.
Yeah, nothing stranger than not being able to select English, but then when I'm watching the credits at the end, they're telling me the English cast. That's weird.
Yeah, so I guess maybe even then, that criticism of High Dive might not fly very far, but their shows always seem to be, like, subtitle quality seems to be good. That's another thing, watching some shows on Crunchyroll, as I just finished Laid Back Camp, and it's just like, I know enough Japanese at this point that I can hear what they're saying and know what it means, and then sometimes, like, the subtitles just don't That's not egregiously wrong, but it's just like lazily wrong. Like instead of the actual translation, it feels like they took the easy way out. And again, I feel like that's probably going to grow as Crunchyroll continues to penny pinch. Subtitles are gonna get worse, and like I said, with High Dive and Sentai Filmworks, I don't ever feel like they're taking advantage of me as a consumer.
Yeah.
And so I'm always, like you said, happy to support everything they do. And we'll see what the future holds for Crunchyroll, because there's not going to be less things going to these other streaming services as they continue to come out. And there's a ton of big shows coming up in 2025. Where they end up sorting themselves will be maybe one of the more interesting stories for the upcoming year. That's our big news items for 2024. Good time to remind you, check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. Of course, you can listen to previous episodes of the Nerdcast Empire, all 123 of them. You can check out our store while you're there. We added a couple of new items, including a bomber jacket of some kind, a coat as well. You can check those out at nerdcastempire.com. We'll be back on Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time with another episode of Music Weekly. The music of the 20th of December. And the list is a short one this week and next week as well. So it'll be very interesting to see whether we find 4 bands. I think we will this week, but it's definitely everybody seems to have eased off on the holiday season as far as releases. So you'll have to tune in Sunday night to find out what we find, and we'll bring that to you this Sunday night at 7 on the Nerdcast Empire. But of course, it is time to continue on with our best of 2024. So we're just going to jump right in the deep end and talk about our best anime or multiple shows potentially of 2024. I kind of wanted to leave it open-ended if either of us had kind of multiple shows we wanted to have in our best of category. And Mike watched a ton of anime this year, maybe more than he's ever watched in a single year. I did not, but I did do a decent job of getting a few big shows watched over the last week. So definitely made some progress there. But you definitely, you went for quality also because you've got some great shows in there. But you watched a lot. There was a lot of quantity in there along with the quality for this year.
Yeah, I tried to give it a good mix. Each season there would be the 1 or 2 shows that I knew I'd be interested in, either because I'm already watching the show or because I knew it was a fairly big title. But then I can't help myself. I have to grab some of the more ridiculously titled shows just to give them a shot, even if they turn out to be pretty awful. If I was going to give like a top 5 for shows just from 2024, I think at number 5 I'd start with the 5th season of Danmachi, even though it's not finished yet. Evidently, it's been delayed until spring now. But Danmachi just each next season just keeps getting better for a show that I thought would just be kind of a throwaway harem type show. It's incredibly enjoyable and not like you would expect just a crappy harem show to be.
Sure.
It's really good. Moving on, one of the big shows from spring of 2024, Kaiju number 8.
Mm-hmm.
That one definitely stood out both with kind of its animation style and just the premise of the show. Definitely, it kind of strikes a nerve because the main character is kind of, I don't want to say old, but he's older. He's reached the age limit where you can no longer try to get into like the force that fights the kaiju. So, you can kind of get behind the character because this is a dude who's really working his hardest to try to reach that level, even though up to that point he's been fairly unimpressive. But yeah, definitely something I recommend. Looking forward to what they have in store for 2025. Moving on to number 3, a show that's coming back this season, Solo Leveling. Definitely one of the more motivational shows that you'll watch. If you do any kind of search on YouTube, you'll find tons of videos of people trying to train like the main character of the show. It was even also the motivation for people to create methods to kind of gamify their daily workflow through an app like Notion, where they basically create quests and classes and experience points and whatnot, very similar to what's going on in Solo Leveling. Just a cool show. Number 2 was a show I actually just finished today. It's the first part of season 1. That's Blue Box. This was one I was kind of waiting to subscribe to Netflix again so I'd actually get a chance to watch it. But yeah, show about badminton, kind of. Just interesting story. You have a high school freshman who is an aspiring badminton player, wants to make the varsity team, so to speak, and make it to nationals. He's inspired by this girl who's a year older than him, who's a standout basketball player. He also has another friend who's in his class who's just this outstanding rhythmic gymnastics athlete. It's just it's kind of a cool show. The badminton stuff is fun, and kind of the way he relates to both his teammates and some of the rivals from one of the other schools is just kind of cool, and kind of makes you envious of how that whole like high school experience and the different sports clubs, how that's structured in Japan, or at least how it's portrayed in anime compared to what we have here in the States, especially if you go to a smaller, more rural place where extracurriculars are much more limited. Finally, for my number one, a show that started back in fall of 2023, went into the winter, and then season 2 started in fall of 2024. Shangri-La Frontier. Just a really cool, thoughtful way to have an anime about an MMORPG and how the players interact with it, both in real life and in game. Kind of cool. Just the way that they reference the events in it, and how the main character will sometimes just go off and play a different game when he's burnt out on it, and so much there to unpack. And I can't wait to see kind of where they go, both in this season and moving forward. But yeah, I'd say those are my top 5 for this year.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, there's a lot there. Obviously, a lot of big shows. And I think that's the thing I enjoy about the anime industry at the moment is no matter what type of shows you like, there feels like there's anywhere between 5 and 10 big titles kind of in that genre or in your wheelhouse, where I could watch 5 really big shows that might be completely different than the 5 you watch, and they may all be amazingly good as well. And I think that's the big thing. Every one of those shows are obviously huge, and some of them continuing on even immediately or later this year. I think that's always a big thing when you're looking for something to watch, is you want to find something that's going to keep going, because that's the thing right now, is if you can find that story that you can tell for 4 or 5 seasons, you're just printing money at that point.
Exactly.
And it's easy for these studios because they don't have to come up with a new idea. They can just, hey, this did well, let's do another season of it. And it seems to have worked really well. Great to have Chris join us in the chat. Happy New Year, Chris. He mentioned he got to check out Rising of the Shield Hero this past year. Chose it as a blind pick over Reincarnated as a Slime, but I have a feeling you probably enjoyed that as well.
Both great shows. Shield Hero Season 1 is top tier. 2 and 3 are fine. They just, it's kind of like watching The Office, right? Like after Season 3, kind of that main plot point kind of resolves itself, and then it
Where do you
struggles
go from
to kind of maintain that same level of intensity. But Slime Season 3 was this year, and it was great too. Second half was kind of more laid back, but there tends to be quite a few of those shows that are like about town building or nation building, and Slime is kind of like that, and it's just really enjoyable.
Yeah, I think that's a show that's really done well for a topic that maybe doesn't inherently seem like it's a great idea. Like it just kind of feels like something thrown together in the isekai generator, but they've nailed it, obviously. He mentions Heavenly Delusions, another show that was interesting to him. Let's finish Solo Leveling, and of course he's been going through the Overlord audiobooks as well, which came out. And shout out to the new overlays that put those together. Thought we'd have something new for 2025. Always great to kind of change up the look every once in a while. But yeah, a lot of really good stuff there. And like I said, I did not get to nearly as much anime in 2024. My goal is to kind of get back on that wagon in 2025, and the 2 shows, one that I finished, the other that I'm about halfway through that I plan on finishing the next day or two, would be kind of 1A and 1B as far as the best shows of the year. And we'll start with the one I finished, and that was Oshinoko Season 2. The first season of that, as I've mentioned previous on this podcast, was maybe one of the best first seasons of a show I've ever watched. The first episode is, as I've mentioned before, if you're getting into the show, the first episode of the first season is like a 90-minute episode. It's almost like a movie that leads you into the story, that kind of tells you the whole backstory of everything that's going on and why everything that happens in the first season happens. And then you get season 2, which is, for those who haven't watched it, won't get much into spoilers, but just note that it is kind of centered around the school play that they're doing, or the play that they're doing. and kind of all the drama involved with that, and obviously big plot points in that as well. But it's just very well written. The characters are very authentic, and I think it's one of those things as a viewer sometimes I compare it a lot to like modern day WWE in that there may be certain people you're rooting for in the show, but you understand the motivations of the people you aren't rooting for too. Like where they're coming from is just very logically explained, where you're like, I see exactly why this character has this motivation because they make it very clear and it feels very true to their character, which is something that WWE didn't do for a very long time, and it's made their product inherently better. And I feel like this show does that as well, because obviously every one of these shows has to leave something hanging for season 3. You do get some drama there at the end of season 2, as you did in season 1, and it sets up what will likely be another big season later in 2025. As they continue to work their way through the mysteries, and we see kind of where the characters go from there. But 2 seasons that have been really outstanding, and really looking forward to season 3 of that later this year. The other one is a kind of a visit with old friends, Sound Euphonium season 3. The first 2 seasons of that were 2 of my favorites. I really enjoyed that show. And then we had the Kyoto Fire after 2016, which unfortunately I believe took the lives of some of the people that had worked on the original Sound Euphonium. And I think there was a lot of question as to how much more of it there would be. I know they did some specials or some movie compilations, and I think people always wondered whether they would revisit it for a full season. They did do that in 2024. Really was kind of cool to catch up with the characters again. I'm about halfway through it, so I'm kind of curious to see where the rest of the season goes. But some of the shows, just endearing storytelling, endearing characters, music-based, opening and ending themes were really good. It's the 3rd time they brought True back to do the open, and True always seems to kind of knock it out of the park. But I'm glad that they were able to kind of bring this back with the main characters all seniors and kind of let them, whatever ends up happening, finish their story and kind of wrap things up for their high school career. But really have enjoyed that. Those would be kind of my 2 top shows for 2024. But Sound Euphonium, like, you kind of have to maybe a little bit be into like music. If you're not a music fan, maybe that doesn't, it's still a good show, but maybe you wouldn't get into as much. Oshinoko, I think anybody could get into that, and I would definitely highly recommend that to anybody who wants to check it out. I didn't get to check out any old shows in 2024. I barely got to watch new shows, as it turns out, but I know Mike had some old shows in 2024 that still need to be kind of honored as best of, but they may not be the best of 2024 just because they were older shows. But as we look at some of the previous season shows that you got around to in 2024, what kind of stuck out to you?
Yeah, so I mean that's the one thing about checking out older shows is chances are the ones you're checking out are all really good, and that's why you're interested in looking into them.
For sure.
You're not going to pick up years later. Where did my document go here so I can make the reference? Something like what was it? The level 2 cheat skill. I just there's so many of those shows that you're not going to go back and revisit at any point in time, and no one would expect you to.
Right.
But yeah, so kind of the top 5 of the older shows I checked out over the year. Number 5, Outlaw Star from winter of 1998. Just a classic late 90s kind of Adult Swim type show. If that means anything to you, it's the kind of show that, yeah, it was on Adult Swim, but even if it wasn't, you'd feel like, hey, it belonged there. Great opening theme, really cool style, as you'd expect from the late 90s. Moving on to number 4. This one's actually only a year old. Came out in spring of 2023, but it was one I kind of picked on a whim because I thought the opening was kind of cool, but turned out to be way better than I guessed it would be. And that was Hell's Paradise. Didn't realize it was more of a horror type show until I started watching it, but yeah, just really cool premise, and they make plants really creepy in that show, which I wasn't really expecting either. Moving on to number 3, show from spring of 2012, kind of the show that I joked about watching for years and then finally watched, and man, I'm glad I did. The show in question is Kids on the Slope. Really cool mid-60s period piece centered around high school kids coming of age and playing jazz music together. probably doesn't sound all that enticing, but it's actually an incredible show and cool too because I don't know a lot about what Japan was like in 1966. So seeing something that depicts that time and that place is just it was really interesting.
And for additional context, before I let you get to your last two, Kids on the Slope was the show that ADV/Sentai Filmworks was announcing in 2012 when we were at Otakon as kind of that, hey, we're coming out of this.
Comeback, yeah.
Where this is, everything that's happened with ADV and us losing these licenses and kind of going away, like we're still here, and here's this huge show, and it's got big names behind it, and as you said, was great, but I feel like it was oversold, unfortunately, and it ended up becoming one that I think if you watch it, you'll probably like it, but it's not Dragon Ball. It's not something that's going to really like scoop the company up and throw them back at the top of the industry again.
For sure. I mean, you look at the art style and then the plot and everything about it screams hidden gem or, cult classic. It doesn't say, hey, this is going to be our big franchise. This is the next Ava. Like that. It just was never going to be that. And it didn't need to be. For me, it served its purpose, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think it's worked out well in the end because Sentai's still around all these years later. So,
and I bought a copy of it at a reasonable price, so I'm happy.
Absolutely.
Moving on to number 2, spring of 1995, we have Fushigi Yugi, really cool mid-90s shoujo title. Had a great open, great ending, great characters. I'm not one of those people like it didn't age well. I don't like that term because it doesn't age. It's the same. It was made when it was made. It is what it is. It's not a human being. I think it's what you'd expect from something made in 1995, and for my taste, that makes it awesome.
Sure.
Then number 1, last October, I wanted to pick out a couple horror titles to go through, just to get in the Halloween spirit or whatever. I watched the original Hellsing anime, the TV, and it was fine, but I'd never touched Hellsing Ultimate until after finishing that, and man, it was a masterpiece. Started in winter of 2006, final episode aired in fall of 2012. Just so amazing. Just the amount of money that undoubtedly went into it that didn't go into the TV was just staggering. You could tell from the production. Apparently it follows the source material a lot more faithfully, and as a result, just so many really cool characters that you didn't have in the TV, a lot of really cool fights and action scenes, and just an amazing overall experience.
Yeah, I've heard nobody say anything bad about that show, and to the point where if you haven't seen any Hellsing, it might be a little difficult to go back and watch the original if you've seen Ultimate because it's just...
Definitely watch the original first, or you're going to be... It would be worse than if you watched Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood than Full Metal Alchemist. Like, both of those are fine. The chasm between Hellsing Ultimate and Hellsing is just... It's great.
Yeah, so definitely if you're going to watch that, watch the old one first, But yeah, a lot of great old shows in there, and that's the fun of it. And I've got like I said, I didn't get to watch any, but I've got a stack of old shows that I'm looking forward to getting to. Specifically, Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha, which they just announced a new series of. I've got the first couple of volumes of that I'm looking forward to checking out. I got Tamako Market, which is another Kyoto Animation show from the mid 2010s. That's kind of one of those cult classics, so I'm looking forward to that. Chris mentioned he started Ultimate but hasn't finished it, so there's still hope for him.
Definitely need to. It was amazing.
But a lot of good stuff that just, again, we talk about Sentai Filmworks, if there's a company B that's like, co-company of the year, Discotek definitely deserves that. They've licensed rescued so many of these old shows. I mentioned Nanoha as one that they licensed rescued, and they're releasing them for reasonable prices as well.
They're the ones who released the DVDs of MXC too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I still need to buy and check out.
So classic.
Classic. The American dubbed version of Takeshi's Castle, which also came back, I believe. So, interesting to check all that out. Obviously, there's always going to be some honorable mentions that maybe don't deserve best of status, but definitely deserve recognition. I had a couple, so I'll get those out of the way. And like I said, Mike, for his volume, I'm sure has a few. Laid Back Camp Season 3. I think I've talked a lot about how much I enjoy Laid Back Camp. It is not breaking any new ground on anime. It's never going to be on the list of the greatest anime of all time. it's just a comfort food anime. It is the characters are great. The scene, the animation is gorgeous. I think this season especially, they really went above and beyond with a lot of the scenery anime because it is them going out camping. So the goal is obviously to have an anime, but also to maybe sell some of these places in Japan to people that want to get out and camp. And it's beautifully animated, and I think that is something that definitely, I'm sure, helps with the tourism industry in Japan, with people kind of wanting to see Mount Fuji and all these beautiful sights. It's just a great show, and they're coming back with a season 4 of that this year in 2025. So I'm excited to catch up with them and wherever they're going to be camping out this year. But just really enjoyed that. And then on the other end of the spectrum is the show All You Sometimes Hides Your Feelings in Russian. It's not a show for normies, I guess. Is there such thing as a normie anime fan? I don't know. Definitely fan servicey, which I think, depending on your level of tolerance for that sort of thing, could determine. I think you'll find out if you watch the first episode of that show and you think this is fine, then I think you're good the rest of the way. If you can't get to the first episode, maybe it's not for you. But it was just really enjoyable. Just to kind of, obviously the title kind of gives some of it away. You got the girl who's in class, but she's, her family grew up in Russia, so she occasionally will speak Russian. Specifically to, obviously you have the slacker boy who's her, love interest in the show, who she will basically run down in Japanese in the first episode, but then will flirt with him in Russian, and she thinks he can't understand, but you find out in the first episode that, he also understands Russian, but she doesn't know that. So he has to sit there and basically not let her know that he can understand everything she's saying. But, the premise is a little silly, but once they get beyond that and they kind of flesh out the characters, it's got a really nice universe of characters and a really cool story, which kind of ends on, I don't want to say a cliffhanger, but it sets you up for what's coming in season 2. But the music from it's great. They did cover songs for the ending themes, which is always great. Samira Uesaka, she just pretty much nails it in whatever she's in.
Yeah.
Just as great in this, and her Russian seems pretty authentic sounding to me. What's notable, which I did not watch the dub, but the lead in the English version of the dub is the same person who plays Ash in the new Pokemon. It's Sarah Natochenny or something, I think's her name. But evidently she has a Russian background as well. So, weird. Hiring her in to do this character made a ton of sense because she, has that authentic Russian as well. So, but yeah, it's a fun show. I think, like I said, if you're on the fence on fan service type anime, watch first episode. If you get first episode doesn't drive you away, I think you'll be good the rest of the way. But those would be my honorable mentions for 2024. Mike, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so I just pulled out 3 for my honorable mentions. One, which would have been in my top 5 until I watched Blue Box recently, and that was Windbreaker from this past spring. Probably doesn't have as interesting of a plot as something like Tokyo Revengers, but at the very least, the main character isn't pathetic, and I think that helps, because that was really the only downside to Tokyo Revengers is just how awful Takamichi was as a character, and never really improved despite getting kind of a second chance to do a lot of the stuff. Just at some point you think, this dude needs to become tough. Just do it, man. And he didn't. But everyone in Windbreaker's tough, so that's definitely a cure for the ills of Revengers. Another one which I couldn't put in my top 5 because I feel like I've watched it before, and that's Rurouni Kenshin, Kyoto Disturbance.
Yeah.
It's amazing, but so was the one from the 90s.
Yeah.
There hasn't really been a whole lot of difference between the two up to this point. Obviously, the animation quality's better in this one. That's bound to be the case. The dub has been very hit or miss. One of the more recent episodes I watched, I was encouraged that Cho from the Jupangatna at least got a pretty good recreation of the voice. He did a good job. Some of the main characters are fine. Kenshin's fine. But I just think Sanosuke is questionable. I'm not a big fan of Saito's voice or Shishio. The original Kenshin dub was just so good. It's tough to bring in. I mean, it'd be like watching the ADV Kenshin movie. It just these aren't the voices I want. What are we doing? But honorable mention because it's still a great story and great animation.
Yeah.
And then finally, kind of from the vault, we have Haven't You Heard I'm Sakamoto? Not a whole lot to say about it. It's stupid but hilarious at times. Definitely something worth watching if you like just dumb comedy anime. So that's why it's on my list.
Yeah, I just saw a graph somewhere, and I'll try to find it. Maybe we'll talk about it next week on our anime podcast. Of somebody had ranked like the dumb anime, like funny dumb shows, and
Nice.
and Konosuba I think was number one on that list. But it was just a bunch of shows that very much like that. That, like, again, not breaking any new ground. It's just if you're looking to have a good time and just enjoy something that sometimes is kind of dumb and funny, that's the kind of show you're looking for. And I think we're always looking for a show like that at some point in the season
absolutely.
to kind of balance out any serious shows you're watching. So good stuff there on the honorable mention list. I'd always want to include Anime Con of the Year, even though we've pretty much made it pretty clear on this podcast what's going to win Anime Con of the Year. To the point where it's just hard not imagining going to this convention every year because they have nailed it the first two times we have gone, and I'm sure your answer is the same as mine. It's Animazement in Raleigh, North Carolina. If it's not the best anime convention in the United States, it's got to be in the top 5 for sure. And obviously we haven't gone to every anime convention, so I can't sit here definitively and say it's the best, but it's got to be among the best. It is the best as far as, first off, Raleigh's a really cool place, really nice area, really safe area for a big city. It's not, the drive isn't the best. It's not terrible, but if it wasn't for
That's really the downside.
The only downside is driving through the mountains, especially coming back. You're just like, I just want to get home. And it's like, you just know you have to go through the mountains, and you run into like a tornado in West Virginia, and we got a bunch of biscuits, which was a weird story. Go back and listen to our podcast on that episode when we talk about Animazement. It was a lot of fun, and weird stuff happened on that trip. But and the con itself is just so well run, and it has so much for really anybody who would want a certain type of experience for a convention. Just could not say enough good things about Animazement.
Yeah, as far as the location goes, it's the next best thing to the Hyatt Regency in the Greater Columbus Convention Center. I still give it the nod, but if you can't be that, what they have down there is totally fine. It's not, you don't feel like you're missing out on anything by being there, as opposed to some other convention venues that we've been to in the past. For me, it all comes down to content. I think that's what you're paying for. That's what you when you're there. It's every convention has a dealer room. Where do you just draw the distinction between your convention and everyone else? And I was kind of looking back at my notes from post Animazement this past year, and just kind of the types of stuff that I like sitting in on. You had numerous anime history type panels. You had anime history 1990 to present. 10 years later, anime in 2014. After the bubble, mecha anime of the 90s and 2000s. Another category, trivia panels. Big fan of those. You had the trivia nights, nerdy trivia, like pub trivia panel. You had the anime music challenge featuring the Fatal Fanatics group of panelists. I'm a big fan of music-related content, so you had like the Inoue Anna Song concert.
Yeah, that was phenomenal.
The Shoujo Rock Heaven panel. And they always have numerous traditional Japanese instrumentalists there as well, so that's always an option. Then kind of your typical stuff, AMV contests, Q&A with Japanese industry workers, the somewhat malign karate demonstration that they have every year, which, I love that they have it because it's just another panel that not all conventions seem to take advantage of. I feel like they still need to work on the routine to make it more palatable to an anime fan, but I think there are so many things you could do with martial arts and tie it into anime. It's a great idea if you know how to execute it.
Yeah, it is, maybe not the best run panel of the weekend, but that's the example of the one that maybe isn't best run compared to some of these other conventions where it would be a lot higher up on the list, but Animazement sets the bar so high. They bring in the food trucks, which is really, really cool. I mean, it is a little pricey, but I mean, you just know that going in.
Hey, OhioCon's bringing in food trucks.
That's what I hear. And you can stand out in 10-degree weather and enjoy your whatever they're going to bring in. So
but really, it's variety. I mean, there are any number of martial arts places in and around the Columbus or even Dayton area, you could talk to one of them and see if they could come up with some sort of anime-inspired panel to run.
Well, and I think, I would assume either Wright State or the University of Dayton would have some sort of Japanese history department that you could bring in a professor to do these panels. I mean,
Wright State offered karate classes.
There you go. Because that was something when I went to Anime Expo back in 2013. The one thing I really liked is there was kind of a wing of the convention center where they were running a lot of those history of anime and how Japanese history tied into anime, a lot of the educational type things. And I could have stayed there the whole weekend because it was the most fascinating thing that they had there. The only downside to Anime Expo is that it's so big and there's so many people. But as far as a convention, it's still really, really good. And I would love to get back out there again. Who knows, maybe in 2025, maybe in 2026, get back out there.
But I think that's also part of the point, too, is that Animazement's very much a mid-sized con, but they have all of this material and all of this content. There's never a drought during your day.
It makes you, fairly or not, judge the conventions that we go to the rest of the year in a different light because you just think, Animazement's not Anime Expo. They're not Otakon. No. They're not Anime New York. They're not these cons that clearly have more money and more attendees, and they are doing it on a mid-sized convention, on a mid-sized budget, reasonably priced. Hotels are reasonably priced. Entries reasonably priced. If they can do it, why can't you? And that's unfortunately, they kind of ruined some of these conventions for us in this area to some degree because you just expect more because it's like, these guys can do this. Why can't you do this?
Yeah.
So, it's just the way it is. But, plan to go back again in 2025, as long as everything works out from a scheduling standpoint. But can't recommend it enough. It's a great convention, and it's going to be hard to dethrone it for Con of the Year unless we start going to some new cons because not overly confident in our current rotation that something's going to dethrone it anytime soon. Our last topic is the best Anna songs of 2024. Mike, of course, ranks his Anna songs. Of course, go to his YouTube page. He goes through each season and will rank the openings of each season. Coming soon will be his full 2024 list. And when he does that, we'll talk about it on the podcast, obviously, as we've done before, the individual season lists. And, because of that, I'm going to leave a lot of the best of on this to him because he's got more of a detailed and analytical list of these. But just a couple ones that were stood out to me before we get to Mike's list. I wasn't sure how I felt about the Oshinoko Season 2 Open because Season 1's Open is just on a totally different level and continues to rank in the year-end Japanese Billboard charts, as we saw in the top 5, I think. But this song grew on me as the season went on. Really enjoyed it. Fits very well with the series, so definitely a fan of that. Fan of the ending themes from Alia, just because you had the cover songs. The cover of Hari Hari Yukai always brings back great memories, so always a fan of that. And the opening to Laid Back Camp Season 3 was really catchy. The ending was really good, too. They brought Asaka back in to do the ending, and she always does great stuff there. That was a lot of fun. But those were the ones of the shows I watched that kind of jumped out at me. But like I said, you've got comprehensive lists, so kind of what jumped out at you as far as Anna songs of 2024.
Yeah, I feel like on the whole, it wasn't quite as strong as 2023 was. My 2023 final list, you had Official Hige Dandism with Tokyo Revengers, White Noise, great song, Man with a Mission from Demon Slayer, the first open from Shangri-La Frontier, just a lot of, to me, bigger hitters than what we ended up with in 2024. But, going back to it, Open 2 from Shangri-La Frontier, Danger Danger by Fathoms, really good. Shouted Serenade by Lisa, open for Irregular at Magic High School. You had Fripside featuring Yoshino Nanjo doing Secret Operation from Mission Yozakura Family. That was a standout. And then ReZero, the open for the new season of ReZero, Reweave by Konomi Suzuki. All of the ReZero music is good. This is no exception, but those were kind of my number ones of the 4 seasons. We'll see how they fare when I actually get around to doing the full year ranking.
Yeah, it was, like you said, it didn't feel like a lot of the big hitters had decent songs in 2024, certainly very serviceable opens and ends. but there wasn't that necessarily mega song. Whereas like the ones you mentioned, and again, that didn't even include the Oshinoko Open, were just huge songs that in any given year from 2023 would have been number one songs for the whole year. And there were like 6 or 7 of them in 2023, whereas it just didn't feel like there was that mega song in 2024. Now, part of that is because neither one of us are real crazy about the Creepy Nuts opens from 2024, and those were 2 of the biggest songs of the year, specifically the Masha one, which is number 1 on almost every list that's out there as far as downloads and streams and everything else. And again, music is, as we learn, we talk about every week on our music podcast, what we think is enjoyable, other people will not. That's why we post Mike's playlist every week, because somebody else may go through there and find a couple of, Norwegian black metal songs that really, tickle their fancy. Same thing with anime themes. Clearly, a lot of people like those songs. I'm not real crazy about them. I like their other work, some of their other work better, but because of that, I mean, it wasn't as great a year music-wise. Although there was a lot of good stuff, it just felt like the ceiling was lower. Maybe the floor was a little higher. It was more things kind of crushed in the middle of good, as opposed to these are just really outstanding, and then there's another set of good, and then maybe farther down. There just wasn't the superlatives to me in the year that there have been. And,
Yeah, I don't know how many from this year I'm going to look back on 5 years from now and be like, that's an all-time great.
Yeah.
White Noise from Official Hige Dandism or even the Oshinoko Open, like you're going to look at those later and they're still going to be pretty high on your list.
Oshinoko might still be at the top of the Billboard list in 5 years at this rate. Like
it's certainly possible.
Like it's crazy what Yoasobi's done some amazing work, and clearly, as we looked at the one list, maybe we'll talk about that list next week on the anime podcast. But there's also a list of the top things of streaming, Billboard or whatever it was, and Mrs. Green Apple was on there like I don't know how many times, and Official Hige Dandism is on there how many times. Like these groups are just songs that are 7 or 8 years old that are still showing up. Like they just won't die.
Exactly.
But it's a good thing about music is you find something that's good and it just kind of hangs on. But before we wrap it up, any last thoughts on the year that was anime 2024?
I feel like I had a lot more to talk about this year than I did from 2023. So that's pretty exciting. It's kind of interesting. I'm looking at my 2023 list and I highlighted a different color of the shows I actually watched. I haven't done that with the 2024 one, but that'll be kind of cool because I feel like there's going to be a lot more there this time around.
Yeah, when you get around to kind of looking at that and what that looks like, and, it's going to look much different. And you're already well on your way in actually, both are well on our way in 2025. I think we've both watched about a dozen episodes so far since the ball dropped in New York City back on Wednesday morning. So, hopefully our 2025 show will be even better, but hopefully we won't be talking about OhioCon and Crunchyroll when we get around to the Best of Anime 2025 in 52 weeks' time, but we'll have to see how that actually works out. That is going to wrap things up for this edition of the Nerdcast Empire. Great to have you along with us again. This was the Best of Anime 2024. We'll be doing the Best of Music 2024 in a few weeks' time as we are wrapping up our music from 2024 before we can get to a Best Of. That'll be coming up in a couple weeks. This week on Music Weekly, we'll be talking about the music of December the 20th, so make sure you join us on Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time for another episode of Music Weekly. A big thanks to Chris and Rachel for joining us in the chat tonight and everybody else who joined us live. Of course, you can always catch us live on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. And don't forget, join our Discord. The link is posted in the chat. You can join and come join the fun over on our Discord. But that is going to wrap things up for this edition of the Nerdcast Empire. For Mike and our entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.